Picture a snowbound farm where silence looms heavy, broken only by the soft creaks of an unsettling house. When a postwoman arrives with letters and finds tracks leading into the barn, and none out, mystery envelops the air. In the mystery of Falkenhof Farm, secrets stir among the shadows, and every whispered story holds a thread of danger. Settle in and unravel the chilling truth hidden beneath the snow. Snow had fallen hard in the night, and then stopped with the abruptness of a slammed door. By morning, the Hohenwald lay under a clean, cruel brightness. The pines stood lacquered and still, their branches bowed as if in prayer. The road that climbed toward Falkenhof Farm had been pressed into two narrow ruts by the last cart to pass. On either side, drifts rose like pale walls. Franziska Moser walked the center line because there was no other place to put her boots. Her breath came out in short ghosts. The leather strap of the post bag cut into her shoulder through her wool. Inside the bag, letters slid and tapped with each step. Paper and promises and small obligations that kept the district stitched together. Falkenhof was meant to be an easy stop, a registered letter from the district office, a tax notice, a signature. In the village, her Falk had grumbled about it at the inn 2 nights earlier, and then, uncharacteristically, had fallen quiet. His wife, Therese, had tightened her shawl and said, without looking at anyone, that the house had been making noises again. "Up above," she had murmured, "where the rafters creak even when there is no wind." Someone had laughed. Someone always laughed, but the laughter had sounded thin in the smoke-dark room. Now, as Franzi crested the last rise, Falkenhof revealed itself. A squat farmhouse joined to its barn by a roofed passage, both buildings crouched against the white like animals bracing for a blow. The yard lay open and bright, the snow unbroken except for one thing: tracks. Franzi stopped without meaning to. The cold seemed to tighten around her ribs. A single set of prints came out of the tree line at the edge of the property, deep, purposeful, as if the person who made them had been carrying weight. The prints crossed the yard in a straight line, heading toward the barn threshold. They ended there. Not softened by drift, not scattered by wind. They simply stopped as if whoever had walked into the yard had stepped through the barn door and been swallowed. Franzi's gaze lifted to the roofed passage between house and barn. It was a low structure of planks and shingles built to keep winter from turning chores into punishments. The boards beneath it were scoured by wind. The snow hadn't settled there in the same smooth layer as the yard. A place a person could move without leaving fresh marks. She swallowed. The air tasted like tin. "Her Falk?" she called, and her voice sounded too loud in the open white. No answer. Only the soft, distant sound of a cow shifting in its stall, wood creaking, a muffled snort. Franzi walked to the farmhouse door. The porch boards were dusted with snow. A small drift had formed against the threshold, as if the door had not been opened in some time. She knocked anyway, the wooden knocker cold against her knuckles. Again, no answer. At the far edge of the yard, near a boundary stake half buried in snow, a figure rose from behind a hedge. Alois Reiter straightened like a startled crow, his shoulders hunched inside a heavy coat. He lifted a hand in a gesture that was not quite greeting. "You shouldn't be here alone," he called. His voice carried across the yard with the dry rasp of a man who drank his tea too hot. When he came closer, Franzi saw the resin stains on his fingers, the way he rubbed thumb and forefinger together as if counting invisible coins. "I'm delivering," she said, shifting the post bag higher. "They've not answered the door. Have you seen them this morning?" Alois's eyes flicked to the barn, then back to her. "Not since yesterday," he said. "Therese was in the village. Said she'd had no sleep. Said the noises were back." "Noises in the loft," Franzi said. He made a sound that might have been a laugh if it hadn't died so fast. "The old stories, a rat, a martin, the house settling." "And the keys?" Franzi asked, remembering the way Therese's hands had worried her apron. Alois's mouth flattened. She said the shed keys were gone, the ring with the blue thread charm. Her Falk accused Emil Vogel. The dismissed one. You know how Falk is, quick to blame. "Emil hasn't been on the farm since autumn," Franzi said. "That's what Emil says." Alois's fingers rubbed again, quicker. Falk said he found a newspaper in the kitchen he hadn't bought. Falk said the barn door was open one morning and shut by afternoon, and he didn't remember touching it. Franzi stared at the one-way tracks. "Who made those?" she asked. Alois followed her gaze. His face tightened, and for a moment the cold seemed to carve him into something older. "Not mine," he said. "Not since last night. I've been on my side of the hedge, same as always." On her side of the hedge, the phrase of a boundary man. The cow in the barn bellowed, a low, impatient sound. There was a reply, another animal, deeper, irritated. The barn was alive. The house was not. Franzi's job was paper. Paper demanded signatures and dates in the dull honesty of ink, but sometimes paper delivered you to a door that did not open. She looked at Alois. "Come with me," she said. He hesitated, the way men did when a threshold promised trouble. Then he nodded once, short and reluctant. "All right," he muttered, "but if Falk sees me in his yard, he'll start yelling about fences again." "Let him yell," Franzi said. She knocked a third time. Harder. The sound echoed into the quiet farmhouse and died. Her hand went to the latch. The door gave with a soft protest. Warm air slid out, faintly scented with boiled potatoes and ash. The house, Franzi thought as she stepped inside, had been lived in recently, and yet it had not answered. The entry hall was dim and smelled of damp wool and old wood. Franzi's boots left dark crescents on the floorboards where snow melted immediately. Alois's shoulders hunched as if he expected the ceiling to drop. "Therese?" Franzi called. The sound traveled down a narrow corridor toward the kitchen and returned as nothing. There was a shelf beside the door for keys. Franzi glanced at it out of habit. A few hooks hung empty. One held a single brass key with a red string tied through the bow, a house key perhaps. Not the shed keyring with the blue thread charm Therese had described. The kitchen door stood half open. The first thing Franzi noticed was the stove. Not blazing, not roaring, but warm. Warm enough that the iron radiated a low heat when she held her gloved hand near it. The ash drawer had been emptied recently. Pale grit lay in a neat mound in the bin. A pot sat on the back ring with a thin skin of congealed broth. The air smelled faintly of onions. Someone had tended the fire within the last hours. "They're here," Alois whispered, and the words sounded like a prayer he didn't want to say. Franzi moved closer, her eyes sweeping the table, the benches, the corners where shadows pooled. A loaf of bread sat covered with a cloth. The cloth had been shifted, reset. The neatness was almost worse than disorder. Disorder could be panic. Neatness could be choice. From deeper in the house came a small sound, a floorboard settling perhaps, or something heavier shifting. Alois stiffened. "Did you hear that?" "Yes," Franzi said. She went to the stairwell. The stairs rose steeply, dark wood polished by years of boots. On the third step, a thin scatter of straw clung to the edge, golden against the brown. Straw did not belong on the stairs. Franzi crouched and touched it. Dry, crisp, it crackled between her fingers. She imagined a sleeve brushing hay in the barn, then brushing against the stair and passing. Upstairs, a door stood ajar. A strip of light cut into the hallway. "We should not go up," Alois murmured. "If they're sleeping." "They're not sleeping," Franzi said. She kept her voice low as if the house might hear. She climbed one step at a time. The air grew colder as she rose. At the top of the stairs she paused, listening. Silence. But not the empty silence of abandonment. A lived-in silence full of things held back. The first room she checked was the Falk's bedroom. The bed was unmade, the blankets thrown back as if someone had risen in a hurry. Therese's shawl lay on a chair, folded neatly despite everything else. Franzi moved to the children's room. 2 small beds, one with a doll tucked under a pillow. A wool cap lay on the floor. A small wooden horse sat on the windowsill, facing outward as if watching the snow. She backed out, the hairs along her arms lifting under her sleeves. "Franzi," Alois called from below, voice tense. "The barn, listen." Franzi went back down, faster now. The barn noises had grown louder, stamping, lowing, the metallic clank of a chain, animals that expected food. Outside, the yard glittered. The tracks still cut their straight line from the woods to the barn threshold. Franzi followed them, her boots stepping carefully beside, not over them. The barn door was shut. She grasped the handle and pulled. The door resisted, then opened with a long wooden groan. The smell hit first. Animal warmth, cold iron tools. It was not a foul smell. It was the smell of work. The cattle turned their broad heads toward the door, eyes dark and liquid. One shoved its muzzle through the stall slats, searching for a hand that would not come. In the center of the barn floor, where hay had been swept aside, there were marks. disturbance in the straw, as if something heavy had been dragged or shifted. Franzi's gaze snagged on a lantern hook near the passage door. The hook was empty. Alois stood behind her, pale. "Johann keeps his lantern there," he whispered. "He never moves it. Never." Franzi stepped forward. Her boot struck something hard. A child's button. Bone white with a small chip along the edge. Greta's coat, Franzi thought. The little girl who kept buttons in her pocket like treasures. Franzi had given her a postcard once, a picture of Munich's towers, and Greta had traced the ink with her finger, as if it were magic. Franzi's throat tightened. She did not look for bodies. Not at first. There were ways of looking that made you complicit in what you saw. She looked instead for evidence of life, because life was what should have been here. And in the barn there was evidence of something else. Intent. A door in the far corner. The tool shed was closed. Its padlock hung open, the hasp unfastened as if someone had left in a hurry and then decided halfway to be polite and close it again. "Therese said the shed key was missing," Franzi murmured. Alois's fingers rubbed together. "Maybe Falk found it," he said too quickly. Franzi stared at the open padlock. If the key had been missing, someone had still gotten in. Outside, the sky shifted. The light dimmed, the way it did before snow began to fall again. Wind moved through the firs with a dry whisper. Franzi stepped back into the farmhouse. She stood in the kitchen, feeling the stove's low heat, and understood with a cold clarity that the house was not empty. Not in the way it should have been. "We have to fetch help," Alois said. Franzi nodded. "Yes," she agreed. "But we do not leave this place unattended." "What do you mean?" Alois asked, eyes flicking to the stairwell as if expecting something to descend. Franzi looked at the shelf of keys, at the warm stove, at the straw on the stairs. "Someone has been here," she said, "and the snow will cover the yard by evening. If we go, we may return to a clean white lie." Wind knocked softly at the window. In the distance, a telegraph pole crackled and then fell silent, as if the district itself had swallowed its tongue. They sent Alois to the village on the only sled that still had runners uncracked by frost. He left with his shoulders hunched and his mouth set, muttering about fences and trouble as if naming ordinary things could keep them ordinary. Franzi stayed. It was not bravery. It was habit. The post did not move only on courage. It moved on stubbornness and the belief that a small order mattered even when larger orders failed. She barred the kitchen door and kept the poker from the stove within reach. She listened to the house's quiet and tried not to imagine the loft above the passage, the dark space where rafters creaked even when there was no wind. When the deputy constable arrived, it was with a flare of relief that tasted like shame. Anton Schreiber came up the track on foot, his greatcoat buttoned high. He carried himself as if he were already the district gendarme, as if a badge, even a small one, could turn snow into obedience. His cheeks were red from cold. His boots, improbably, were glossy. "Moser," he said, as if her name were a tool he knew how to use. "Ryder said there's trouble." "There's silence," Franzi replied, "and warmth where there shouldn't be warmth." Anton's gaze swept the yard, lingering on the one-way tracks. "Humph," he said, a sound meant to suggest he understood without being impressed. "Could be Emil Vogel. He knows the place. He's a bitter one." Franzi watched him step over the tracks without looking at them closely. It was a small thing, but it tightened something in her chest. Inside, Anton moved through the kitchen with the ease of a man who had been in many kitchens. He opened cupboards, peered into corners, lifted the breadcloth. "No blood," he said, and spoke as if the absence solved something. No broken furniture, no sign of struggle. Franzi's eyes went to the ash bin. "Someone tended the stove," she said. Anton glanced at it. "Therese could have," he said, dismissive. "Old women are always fussing with fire." Franzi bit down on the sharp retort. She reached into her postbag and pulled out the registered envelope and its receipt slip. The slip was the district's proof, a small rectangle of paper with boxes for date, name, signature. Her gloved thumb rubbed the edge. Paper told stories. Not always the ones people meant. She went to the table and spread the slip flat. "This needs a signature," she said, though she knew now that signatures were not simple things. Anton shrugged. "If they're missing, we note it," he said. "We cannot wait for ink." Franzi opened the drawer where Therese kept writing things. A stub of pencil lay there, a pen with a broken nib, a bottle of ink, corked. She glanced back to the table. The receipt slip lay where she had set it, only now there was writing on it. A name, looped and slanted, Johann Falk. Her stomach dropped. "I didn't," she began. Anton looked over her shoulder. "Well," he said, satisfaction creeping into his voice. "There. Signed." Franzi's eyes narrowed. The letters were shaped like Johann's, but the pressure was wrong. The ink, no, not ink, pencil. The strokes cut too deeply into the paper, leaving grooves you could feel with a fingertip. Johann wrote with a farmer's bluntness. Yes, but his hand was steady. This hand pressed as if it were angry at the page. "Who signed this?" Franzi asked softly. Anton's brow lifted. "You said it needed a signature. Perhaps Therese did it for him, or Falk stumbled down and scrawled it and went back up. You're making a fuss." Franzi stared at the slip as if it might change under her gaze. "I had it in my bag," she said. "It didn't leave my possession." Anton's expression tightened. "Are you accusing me?" "I'm saying paper doesn't write itself," Franzi replied. In the pause that followed, the house seemed to lean closer, listening. Anton's gaze flicked to the stairwell. He shifted his weight. For a moment his boot brushed the passage door frame, and Franzi saw it. A faint black smear on the beam at shoulder height, as if wax had been dragged across it. Boot polish. Anton noticed her looking and moved abruptly, placing himself between her and the beam. "We need to search the barn properly," he said, brisk now, "and the loft. We must be thorough." But his eyes did not look toward the loft. They avoided it. Franzi folded the receipt slip carefully and placed it back into her bag as if it were fragile. Her hands did not shake. Her thoughts did. Outside, the wind rose. Snow began to whisper against the windows again, soft and persistent, as if the world were trying to erase what it did not want to see. By afternoon, the farm felt smaller. Snow fell in fine grains, thickening the air. The yard blurred at its edges. The one-way track softened, then vanished under the new layer, leaving only Franzi's memory of their straight, impossible line. More people came, late, reluctant. Caspar Dietz arrived first, his carpenter's hands wrapped in wool, his beard dusted white. Sister Ilse followed, cheeks pink from cold, her basket of parish linens clutched like a shield. Oscar Brand appeared with his cart half buried in drift, laughing too loudly as if the sound could keep fear away. They crowded into the kitchen, bringing heat and breath and the smell of wet wool. The stove was fed again. Sister Ilse, unable to help herself, straightened the loaf cloth and aligned the cups on the shelf. Anton stood at the center of it like a nail driven into wood. "No one touches anything," he said, then immediately touched everything, moving chairs aside and opening doors with a kind of irritated authority. Franzi watched him with her post-bag hanging heavy at her hip. She watched Caspar's eyes travel to the passage. She watched Sister Ilse's mouth tighten as she looked toward the stairs. "The telegraph's down," Caspar reported. "Line snapped near the bend. No messages in or out until morning, maybe later." Anton's jaw worked. "Then we wait," he said, "and we keep order." Oscar made a little bow. "Order on a farm," he said. "That's like trying to iron fog." No one laughed. Franzi turned away from the kitchen noise and went to the trash bin. She didn't know exactly what she was looking for, only that people left pieces of themselves behind when they tried to be neat. Under potato peels and a crushed eggshell, she found a paper band, thin, printed with neat black type, a newspaper wrapper. She smoothed it with her glove. At one end was a stamp, the name of a printer in a town 2 hours away, not the village's small press. Oscar's newspaper, she thought. "Did you bring papers up to Falkenhof recently?" she asked, turning to him. Oscar's thumb went to his mouth, licked before he could stop himself. "Ah," he said. "The paper? Yes, last week. Herr Falk wanted the market prices, always worried about grain. I sold him one." "Last week," Franzi repeated. Oscar shrugged, too casual. "Or maybe 3 days. The snow muddles time." Franzi folded the wrapper band and slipped it into her pocket. It was not proof of murder. It was proof of presence. Someone had handled papers recently enough to throw this away. They searched the barn again. Caspar lifted his lantern high, the light dull and yellow against the dark wood. Shadows jumped along the rafters. At the barn door, Franzi noticed something small beneath the bottom board, a wedge of fresh wood, pale against the darker planks. It had been cut cleanly, the saw marks distinctive. Caspar's work. Caspar followed her gaze and frowned. "That's mine," he said slowly. "Off-cut from the passage repair, but I didn't put it here." Anton leaned in. Perhaps Falk did, he said. Kaspar's eyes narrowed. Falk wouldn't waste a wedge like that, he said. He'd save it. He saved everything. The wedge kept the door from sitting flush. It made the door close softly, catching before it slammed. It was a small adjustment, the kind a person might make if they wanted silence. We must open the loft hatch, Franzi said. Sister Ilse made the sign of the cross. Do we have to? She whispered. Anton's voice sharpened. It's dangerous, he said. Old beams, loose boards, someone could fall. We can fall anywhere, Oscar muttered, staring at the dark above, sometimes without moving. Franzi stepped to the ladder. She climbed until her head was level with the hatch. The wood was worn, the edge splintered by years. She pushed. The hatch resisted, not stuck by swelling. Held. Something had been placed against it from above. Franzi's heart thudded. She looked down at Anton. Why is this barred? She asked. Anton's face went tight. Probably a broom fell, he said. Or hay shifted. Franzi did not argue. She climbed back down slowly. The animals shifted in their stalls, restless. Somewhere above them, the rafters clicked. One small sound, then another, as if a person's weight had moved in the dark. The kitchen behind them was full of people and warmth, and still Franzi felt a cold thread run down her spine. The house, she thought, was keeping its breath, and someone was helping it. Night came early, dragged in by the storm. They lit lamps. Shadows pooled in corners. The windows turned black, reflecting only the room and the faces inside it. The district gendarme did not arrive. The road was closed by drift. The telegraph line lay dead in the snow like a snapped vein. Anton insisted everyone stay together as if company could be a lock. Sister Ilse muttered prayers under her breath, straightening and re-straightening the same cup. Kaspar sat with his hands around a mug as if it were the only warm thing left in the world. Oscar paced, his cart forgotten outside, his jokes dried up. Franzi watched Anton polish his boots. It was a quiet, intimate act. He sat near the stove, cloth in hand, rubbing wax into leather until it gleamed. The motion was steady, almost soothing. The smell of polish rose sharp and oily under the scent of onions. Do you always do that? Franzi asked, keeping her voice mild. Anton didn't look up. A man should keep himself presentable, he said. Even on a farm, Franzi said. He finally lifted his eyes. They were pale and flat. Especially on a farm, he replied. When everyone's attention was pulled toward a sudden bang, a shutter slapping in wind, Franzi slipped out through the passage door. She took Kaspar's lantern. Its light made a small circle in the dark, the beam jittering with her breath. The roofed passage was colder than the kitchen. Wind hissed through cracks in the planks. Snow had blown in along the edges, leaving thin ridges like salt. Franzi ran her gloved fingers along the beam where she'd seen the black smear. The wax was tacky, fresh. She climbed the barn ladder again, more carefully this time, and pressed her shoulder against the loft hatch. It resisted. She shifted her weight, pushing. Something scraped. The hatch opened. Franzi held breath and lifted herself into the loft. The air up there was dry and sharp with hay. Dust floated in the lantern light like tiny moths. The rafters formed a low maze of beams and shadows. Somewhere a mouse skittered and went still. She moved slowly. The lantern held low. The floorboards creaked beneath her boots. She could feel, in her bones, the way sound carried down. Near the center beam, she saw it, a small loop of blue thread tied neatly around a lantern hook. Franzi's pulse jumped, the blue thread charm. It hung there like a marker, a bright bit of color in the dark. As if someone had tied it to find their way back in low light. As if the loft were a hallway they expected to walk again. Beneath the hook tucked behind a beam was the keyring itself. 2 keys and a small tin token dull with handling. Franzi picked it up carefully. The metal was cold enough to sting through her glove. Behind her the loft boards creaked. She froze. Lantern light steadied. Dust fell slowly. Another creak, closer. Franzi turned, lantern raising. Anton stood at the hatch, his face half lit and half blank. He stared at the blue thread, then at the keys in her hand. You shouldn't be up here, he said softly. Franzi's voice came out calm because fear, when it had a shape, could be handled. Neither should the keys, she replied. Anton climbed into the loft with the careful movements of a man who knew the boards. His boots did not slip. His hand found a beam in the dark without searching. Give those to me, he said. No, Franzi said. His lips tightened. This is police business. "You're a deputy," Franzi said, and felt the words land like a stone, "and you've been too eager to keep people out of this loft." Anton's eyes narrowed. "You think you're clever because you carry letters," he murmured. "Paper isn't courage." Franzi held the keyring up so the lantern light caught the blue thread. "Paper is proof," she said, "and this thread is a story. Someone tied it here on purpose." Anton took a step forward. Down below in the barn, a cow lowed, loud, demanding, alive. Franzi's mind moved quickly, slotting pieces together. The warm stove, the forged signature, the boot polish smear at shoulder height. The barred hatch, the wedge at the barn door to keep it quiet, the newspaper wrapper that proved someone had been here after the farm's last normal day. Anton's gaze flicked to the lantern, then to the hatch, as if measuring exits. "We're going down," Franzi said, "all of us. And then we're going to talk in the kitchen where everyone can hear." Anton's mouth twitched. Not a smile. Something close to it and colder. "You think they'll believe you?" he asked. Franzi held his gaze. "I think you'll help me," she said, "because if you don't, the next thing I do is scream, and then your tidy little order becomes chaos." For a moment, the loft was only hay dust and breath. Then Anton stepped back one careful pace and angled his body toward the hatch as if granting her passage. "Go on," he said. Franzi climbed down first, keyring clutched so hard her fingers ached. She did not turn her back to him until her boots hit the barn floor and she could hear, behind her, his own careful descent. The farm was sealed by snow and dark. But the truth, Franzi thought, had found a small blue thread to pull. In the kitchen, faces turned toward the keys in Franzi's palm as if they were aflame. Sister Ilse's hands flew to her mouth. Kaspar rose half out of his chair. Oscar swore softly, then crossed himself as if borrowing Sister Ilse's habit could protect him. Anton stood beside the stove, too still. His boots shone. "These were in the loft?" Franzi said, "tied to a hook with Therese's blue thread charm." Sister Ilse whispered. "Why would someone, to find their way," Franzi said, "in the dark, in a space they planned to use?" Kaspar's jaw clenched. "The hatch was barred," he said. "I felt it today. Something held it shut." Anton's gaze snapped to Kaspar. "You're imagining things." Franzi opened her post bag and took out the registered receipt slip. She laid it on the table, smoothing it flat. "This was signed today," she said, "after I arrived, after we found no one answering, and I did not let it out of my possession." Oscar leaned in, squinting. "That looks like Falk," he said uncertainly. Franzi nodded. "It's meant to," she said. "But look at the grooves." She turned the paper and let the lamplight rake across it. The indentation showed deep, harsh lines pressed into fiber. Kaspar, who knew pressure in wood, understood pressure in paper. "Whoever wrote that," he said quietly, "was angry." Anton's voice sharpened. "This is nonsense." Franzi ignored him and lifted her gloved hand to the passage beam. "There's boot polish on the beam outside," she said. "Fresh, at shoulder height. Someone carrying something bulky brushed against it." Sister Ilse's eyes flicked to Anton's boots, then away, as if ashamed of her own suspicion. Franzi's stomach tightened with the weight of what she was doing. Accusations were dangerous things in a small district, but danger, she reminded herself, was already here. It had been here in the loft, tying blue thread to hooks. "The yard showed one set of tracks," Franzi continued. "Into the barn, none out." Oscar made a small sound. "The snow covered them," he said. "Not the first time," Franzi said. "This morning, before the new fall, they were clear. They ended at the barn threshold, but the passage boards were windswept, no snow to take prints. Someone could move between house and barn without leaving new marks." Kaspar rubbed his thumbnail against a nail head, his thinking tell. "And my wedge," he said slowly, "under the barn door, to keep it from slamming." Silence tightened. Anton's mouth was a thin line. "You're weaving stories," he said. "You want a villain because silence frightens you." "No," Franzi said. Her voice stayed level because it had to. "I want a timeline, and paper, and the way people move through spaces." She looked at Sister Ilse. "You came with parish linens?" she said gently. "Why?" Sister Ilse flushed. "Therese asked me," she whispered, "yesterday. She said she was afraid. She said someone had been in the house, that the keys were gone. She asked if the parish could send someone to stay, just one night, because Johann wouldn't listen." Anton's eyes flickered. Franzi felt the click in her mind, the moment when loose things settled. Therese had been afraid of someone already inside. Franzi looked at Anton. "You've visited Falkenhof often," she said, "to help with disputes, to check papers, to calm things. You know the passage. You know the loft. You know where the keys hang." Anton's nostrils flared. "You told us the loft was dangerous," Franzi said, "but you climbed down from it like you'd done it 100 times. You knew where to put your hand without searching." Oscar's eyes widened. "Anton!" Anton's voice cut like a blade. "Enough," he snapped. The stove crackled softly. Wind hissed against the window. Somewhere in the barn, a chain clanked as an animal shifted. Franzi did not flinch. "Here is what I believe," she said. "Someone stayed in the loft space above the passage during the storm. Someone used the roofed boards to move without leaving tracks. Someone took the keyring, tied its charm as a marker in the dark, and used the keys to open the shed without forcing anything. Someone tended the stove and the animals afterwards so the farm would seem normal from the road. Someone forged Johann's signature on my receipt to create a paper trail that said, 'All is well.'" She let the last words hang. Anton's eyes were flat. "And you say that someone is me," he said, almost conversational. Franzi met his gaze. "Yes," she said. Kaspar's hands curled into fists. Sister Ilse whispered a prayer that sounded like a sob. Oscar took a step back as if the kitchen floor had become thin ice. Anton's mouth twitched again. Then he did something small, so small Franzi might have missed it if she hadn't trained herself to watch. He glanced toward the corner cupboard, the one where Therese kept extra lamp oil. Franzi understood in a rush. A man cornered did not always flee. Sometimes he burned his way out. "Kaspar," she said sharply. "The door." Kaspar moved without asking, blocking the exit with his broad shoulders. Oscar fumbled for the poker by the stove. Sister Ilse backed toward the wall, hands trembling. Anton's hand went to his coat pocket. Franzi's voice stayed calm, though her heart hammered. "Don't," she said. "It won't make you less guilty. It will only make you more obvious." Anton's eyes flicked from face to face, counting, measuring. Then very slowly he withdrew his hand from his pocket. In it was not a knife. It was a small bottle of ink corked. He held it up as if it were a joke. "Proof?" he said softly. "Is this your proof?" Franzi felt something cold settle in her stomach. Not fear, confirmation. Because only one person in the room had reason to reach for ink. Only one person had needed to make paper lie. Outside in the deep night, a sound rose, faint at first, then clearer. A bell. Sled runners on packed snow. Help at last. Arriving too late for mercy, but perhaps in time for justice. The district gendarme arrived with 2 men and a lantern that threw hard light across the yard. He was older than Anton, his face lined and tired, his moustache rimmed with frost. He listened in the kitchen without interrupting, eyes moving from Franzi's keys to the forged receipt to Anton's polished boots. When Franzi finished, the room held a silence so complete it felt carved. The gendarme spoke at last. "You found the keyring in the loft," he said. Franzi nodded. "Tied with a blue thread charm to a lantern hook," she said. "As a marker." Anton's jaw clenched. "She's spinning fantasies," he said. His voice was steady, but his fingers had begun to rub against each other. A mimicry of Alois's nervous tell, and somehow worse for being borrowed. The gendarme's gaze flicked to the passage door. "Show me," he said. They went in a tight group, lanterns held high. The passage boards creaked under boots. Wind hissed through the cracks. The beam Franzi had touched earlier shone with a faint black smear. "Boot wax," Kaspar said. The gendarme touched it with a gloved finger, then looked at Anton. "You polish your boots," he observed. Anton's lips thinned. "A man should keep himself." "Presentable," Franzi finished softly and saw Anton flinch. In the barn, the animals shifted and watched. Their eyes reflected lantern light like small coins. Kaspar lifted the ladder. The gendarme climbed first, steady and sure, and pushed the loft hatch open. Up above, the air was dry and sharp with hay. The gendarme found the hook and the loop of blue thread still tied there. He stared at it for a long moment. Then, quietly, he said, "Whoever did this meant to come back." Anton's breath hitched. It was a tiny sound, but in a loft that carried every creak, it landed like a shout. The gendarme turned. "Deputy Schreiber," he said, "you told these people the hatch was dangerous and should not be opened." Anton lifted his chin. "It is dangerous," he said. The gendarme's eyes were tired. "And yet you climbed down from it tonight without hesitation," he said. "You knew where to put your hand. You knew where to place your foot. You moved like a man in familiar darkness." Anton's gaze darted to Franzi, sharp with hatred now, stripped of pretense. "You think you know things," he hissed. Franzi's voice was quiet. "I know paper," she said, "and I know when someone wants a paper trail more than they want the truth." Back in the kitchen, the gendarme examined the receipt slip again. He held it up to the light, then turned it so the grooves caught. He compared it to Johann Falk's tax ledger, heavy, blunt strokes, but steadier, less forced. "Imitation," he murmured. Anton barked a laugh that sounded like glass breaking. "So what?" he snapped. "A man signs for another. A wife signs for a husband. It happens." "It happens," the gendarme agreed, "but it does not happen from inside a locked silence." Franzi felt the weight of the moment settle into her bones. She did not want Anton to be guilty. Wanting did not matter. Only the chain did. The gendarme looked at Kaspar. "The wedge," he said. Kaspar brought it from the barn door, holding it like an accusation. "Mine," he said, "but not placed by me." Anton's eyes flicked again toward the cupboard with lamp oil. The gendarme saw it too. "Enough," the gendarme said, and his voice held a finality Anton could not polish away. "Anton Schreiber, you are relieved. Give me your keys." Anton's mouth opened, and for a second Franzi thought he would fight. She watched his shoulders, the set of his hips, the way a man decided. Then he did not reach for oil or blade. He reached instead for words. "Johann Falk was going to ruin me," he said, voice low and ugly. "He thought he was better than everyone. He thought a letter could kill a man." The gendarme's face did not change. "And so you killed him," he said, plain. Anton's eyes flashed. "I didn't mean," he began, then stopped. His throat worked. "I meant to talk," he said, and the lie was so thin it barely existed. "I meant to make him listen, but he wouldn't. And then Therese. She saw, and the girl." He swallowed hard, and the room seemed to lean closer. Franzi's stomach turned, not with gore, but with the cold knowledge of how quickly a life could be reduced to a sentence fragment. "After," Anton said, voice flattening as if he were reciting a report, "I had to make it ordinary. I had to buy time. If the animals cried, people would come. If the stove went cold, the smoke would stop. Silence draws eyes." Sister Ilse made a sound like a strangled prayer. Franzi's hands clenched around the keyring. The blue thread charm pressed into her palm, a small, domestic thing turned into a marker in a murderer's dark. The gendarme nodded once, as if a final piece had slid into place. He signaled his men. Anton did not resist when they took him. His boots gleamed as he was led out, polished and ridiculous against the snow. Outside, dawn began to thin the darkness, turning the sky a bruised gray. The storm eased, as storms did, leaving behind a world that looked clean and innocent. Franzi stood in the yard with her post bag hanging heavy at her hip. The farm buildings loomed in the pale light, ordinary shapes made monstrous only by what had happened inside them. The gendarme approached her. "You did well," he said, not warmly, but with the weary acknowledgement of one worker to another. Franzi nodded, unable to find words that did not feel too small. She thought of Therese asking the parish for someone to stay. She thought of Greta's chipped button. She thought of the stove's low heat, the animals fed, the breadcloth reset, how someone had tried to make horror wear a familiar face. Paper mattered, she reminded herself, not because it was noble, because it was stubborn. It held the shape of pressure long after hands let go. Franzi walked back to the kitchen table and took out the registered envelope. She placed it beside the ledger where Johann's real hand had written its blunt truths. On the receipt slip, the forged signature still scarred the paper. She did not tear it up. She wrote, in her own careful hand, the date and a single line beneath the false name, "Delivered to silence, witnessed by snow." Then she capped the pencil, closed her bag, and stepped outside into the widening day, while Falkenhof Farm stood behind her. Quiet at last, not because someone had tended its ordinary life, but because the lie had finally been forced to stop breathing.